Picture this. You open an envelope on a Tuesday morning. Your hands are shaking. Inside is a single piece of paper, a certified letter from the IRS. Not about your taxes, about your HOA. And the woman smiling at you in every neighborhood newsletter suddenly isn't smiling anymore. That is exactly what happened to me. And by the end of this story, you are going to wish it happened to your HOA too. My name is David. David Chen. I moved into Maple Ridge Estates in the spring of 2022. It was everything I had been searching for. A quiet, tree-lined community on the edge of town with good schools, friendly neighbors, and a homeowners association that, on paper at least, looked like it was run by professionals. The brochure handed to me at the model home was polished. Glossy photos of clean sidewalks, freshly painted mailboxes, and a community pool that looked like something straight out of a vacation catalog. And front and center on the very last page was a photo of the woman who ran it all. Karen Mitchell. She was smiling the kind of smile that made you feel like everything was completely under control. Blonde hair, pulled back neatly. A blazer, always a blazer. Always red. And her eyes, sharp, the kind of eyes that told you she had already thought of something you hadn't. At the time, I thought that was a good thing. I was wrong. Karen had been the president of the Maple Ridge Estates HOA for 6 years. When I moved in, 6 years, in a community of 240 households. That was a long time. Longer than most people lasted in that role. People told me she was dedicated, committed. That she gave up her weekends to attend every single board meeting. That she personally oversaw every project. That she was the single reason the neighborhood looked as good as it did. You're lucky to have Karen. My neighbor, Linda, told me during my first week. Linda was in her 60s. Cheerful. The kind of woman who baked cookies for every new family on the block. She handed me a casserole dish and pointed toward Karen's house. She keeps this place running like a well-oiled machine. I believed her. We all did. The first few months were completely uneventful. I paid my monthly dues on time, $180, every single month, without fail. I attended the quarterly meetings when I could. I waved to Karen when I saw her on the sidewalk during her morning walks. She always waved back. She remembered my name, my dog's name, Max. Even that, I had just started a new job downtown. It was the most pleasant HOA experience I had ever had, and I had lived in 3 different HOA communities before Maple Ridge. But here is the thing about Karen Mitchell, the thing that took me almost a full year to figure out. Karen was not just dedicated. She was meticulous. And there is a very big difference between someone who cares about the details and someone who controls them. Karen was the second kind. I just didn't know it yet. The first crack appeared in March of 2023. It was small, so small it was easy to miss if you weren't paying close attention. And most people at Maple Ridge were not paying attention. They were too busy living their lives, enjoying the neighborhood, trusting the system Karen had quietly put in place years before any of us arrived. It was a single line item on the monthly statement. I had gotten into the habit of actually reading those statements, not just glancing at the total at the bottom and writing a check. Every single line. My father was an accountant for over 30 years. He used to sit at the kitchen table after dinner with a red pen, circling things that didn't add up. He passed that habit on to me. David, he would say, leaning forward, the devil lives in the details, and he pays rent. I never forgot that. So there I was, at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, reading my statement from March of 2023, and I noticed something, a charge labeled Preventive Maintenance Common Area. The amount of $475. That didn't seem unusual on its own. The HOA charged maintenance fees regularly. Lawn care? Pool service? Streetlight work? But something about this particular charge felt off to me. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, so I set it aside and kept reading. 2 weeks later, the April statement arrived. Same charge, preventive maintenance, common area. Same amount, $475. And then in May, and then in June. By the time July rolled around, I had seen that exact charge 6 times. 6 times $475. That was $2,850 in 6 months, all for preventive maintenance on common areas. I walked through the neighborhood every single day with Max. I knew every sidewalk, every bench, every patch of grass, and I hadn't seen a single maintenance crew. Not one truck, not one worker, not one tool. That's when my father's voice echoed in my head again. The devil lives in the details, David. So I started asking questions, quietly, at first. I emailed the HOA management office, a company called Sunrise Property Solutions, and asked for a detailed breakdown of the preventive maintenance charges. Invoice numbers, names of contractors, dates of work performed, proof that the money was actually going where they said it was. The response came back 3 days later. A single sentence: "Thank you for your inquiry. All maintenance activities are managed and approved directly by the board president. Please direct further questions to Ms. Mitchell." Karen. Everything led back to Karen. I should have let it go. That is what most people would have done. Most people did. They paid their dues. They smiled at Karen on the sidewalk. They thanked her at the quarterly meetings. They trusted her completely because she had spent 6 years earning that trust, and that trust had never been publicly questioned. Not once. But I didn't let it go. Something in my gut told me not to. That quiet, persistent feeling, the kind that sits in your chest and refuses to disappear no matter how busy you make yourself. And I have learned, over many years, that when that feeling shows up, the worst thing you can do is ignore it. So, I started digging. My first stop was the Public Records Office at the County Clerk's Building downtown. I spent an entire Saturday afternoon there, going through every document I could find related to Maple Ridge Estates. Tax filings, property records, business registrations, anything public. Anything that could give me one single thread to pull. And that is exactly when I found it. A business registration filed in the name of Sunrise Preventive Services, LLC. Not Sunrise Property Solutions. Not the management company everyone knew. A completely different company, but registered on the exact same date, with the exact same registered agent address. Same street, same suite number, same sheep code, and the sole owner listed on that filing. Karen Mitchell. I sat in that fluorescent-lit office, staring at that piece of paper, and the room went completely silent. Karen wasn't just the HOA president who smiled and waved and remembered your dog's name. She owned a company that was billing the HOA. She had been paying herself through a fake maintenance company, with money that belonged to every single homeowner in Maple Ridge Estates, and she had been doing it for a very, very long time. I closed the folder and looked up, and there, right through the glass door of the clerk's office, standing on the steps outside with her phone pressed to her ear, was Karen Mitchell. Red blazer, blonde hair pulled back, not a strand out of place. She was laughing at something, a full, open laugh, her head tilted back. Then she glanced up and looked directly through the glass. Directly at me. She stopped laughing, and she smiled. But not the warm, neighborly smile I had seen 100 times on our street. This one was different. Slower, colder. This one said, "I see you, David." And this one said, "It doesn't matter." If you have ever lived in an HOA and felt like something wasn't right, drop a comment right now and tell me your story. Because what I found next changes everything. And Karen Mitchell. She is about to have the worst week of her entire life. I had the name. I had the address. I had proof, on paper, in black and white, that the president of my HOA owned a secret company that was stealing from all of us. So why didn't I go straight to the police? Because Karen Mitchell was 3 steps ahead of me, and I was about to find out just how far she had planned. I drove home from the county clerk's office with both hands on the steering wheel and my mind racing. The folder with Karen's business registration sat on the passenger seat beside me, and every few seconds I glanced over at it, as if it might disappear. But it didn't disappear. It stayed exactly where I had put it. And the name on that filing, Sunrise Preventive Services, LLC, owned by Karen Mitchell, stayed exactly the same every time I looked. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table until nearly 2 in the morning, going through everything I had, the monthly statements, the emails to Sunrise Property Solutions, the business registration. I spread it all out in front of me and tried to understand the full picture. How long had this been going on? How much money had Karen actually taken? And more importantly, had anyone else noticed? The answers came slowly, and they were not good. I started with the math. I went back through my records and pulled every statement I had from the day I moved in. 18 months of documents. I went through each one line by line and highlighted every charge from Sunrise Preventive Services. The pattern was immediately clear. The charges had started in September of 2021, 4 months before I even moved into Maple Ridge. They had been appearing every single month, without exception, and the amounts had been climbing. Not quickly, not in a way that would jump out at you if you weren't looking for it, but steadily, quietly. Like water, finding a crack in a wall and slowly widening it. By the time I finished the math, the total made my stomach turn. In the 18 months since I had moved in, Karen had billed Sunrise Preventive Services a total of $112,300 to the HOA. $112,000 for maintenance work that had never happened. But that was only since I arrived. To find out the full amount, the real total, I would need to go back further. Much further. The next morning, I called Linda, my neighbor, the woman who had told me I was lucky to have Karen. I didn't tell her what I had found. Not yet. I just asked a simple question. Did she still have her old HOA statements? The ones from 2019, 2020, 2021. There was a pause on the line. Sure. David. I keep everything. Why do you ask? Just doing some research, I said. Mind if I come take a look? She didn't hesitate. 20 minutes later, I was sitting on Linda's couch with a box of files on the coffee table in front of me. She brought me tea. She sat in the armchair across from me, knitting a scarf, humming softly. She had no idea what was about to happen. I opened the first folder and started reading. It took me 2 hours. 2 hours of going through every statement, page by page, highlighting every charge from Sunrise Preventive Services. The charges went back even further than I had expected, all the way to March of 2019. 4.5 years, 4.5 years of fake invoices, every single month, without fail. When I finished adding up the numbers, I set the pen down and sat back. The total was $347,200. $347,000, stolen from the homeowners of Maple Ridge Estates. Quietly, methodically. Over 4.5 years, through a company that existed only on paper, run by the woman who smiled at you every single morning on the sidewalk. Linda looked up from her knitting. David, you look a little pale, dear. Are you all right? I almost told her right then. Almost said everything, but something stopped me. I needed more than numbers on a spreadsheet. I needed proof that Karen knew exactly what she was doing. Proof that this wasn't some kind of accounting error. I needed to prove intent. And that is when I remembered something Karen had said at the quarterly meeting back in January of 2023. She had stood at the front of the community room. Karen always stood, never sat, at those meetings, and she had held up a printed report. She smiled that wide, confident smile of hers, and said, I want to assure everyone that every single dollar of your dues is being accounted for with full transparency. She looked around the room as she said it, making eye contact with everyone, nodding, projecting total control. Every single dollar. Full transparency. Karen had looked directly at the camera someone had set up to record the meeting. She had said those words on the record, and at that exact moment, she was stealing from all of us. The audacity of it took my breath away. I went home that afternoon and started building a real case. Not just numbers. I needed documentation. I needed to show not only that the charges were fraudulent, but that Karen had actively concealed them, that she had set up a system designed specifically to hide what she was doing. Over the next 2 weeks, I went back to the county clerk's office 3 more times. I pulled every public document I could find on Sunrise Preventive Services, tax records, business filings, annual reports. What I found was revealing. The LLC had no employees, no physical address other than a PO box, no website, no phone number that connected to a real person. It was, in the most literal sense, a shell. Every single payment to that shell company had come from the Maple Ridge Estates HOA operating fund, the account Karen controlled as board president. No other board member could authorize payments without her signature. It was airtight. Karen had built a system that only she could run. Only she could authorize the charges. Only she could approve the payments. She had made herself the single point of control for everything financial in the HOA, and she had done it so gradually, so casually, that nobody had ever questioned it. I was starting to understand just how smart Karen Mitchell really was. But smart was not the same as invincible, and I had just found something Karen had not expected anyone to find. During one of my trips to the records office, I had asked the clerk, an older man named Gerald, who had worked there for over 20 years, if there were any federal records tied to HOA or relit businesses in the county. He looked at me over his reading glasses and said something that changed everything. "You want federal? You're looking at the wrong place. Son, you want to see what the IRS has on file? You file a Freedom of Information request. Takes a few weeks, but they'll send it." The IRS. I had not thought about the IRS. Not once. I had been so focused on the county records, the business filings, the HOA statements, that I hadn't looked up. But if Karen was running a fake company and funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars into it, there was one organization in this country that had a very specific interest in that kind of activity. The Internal Revenue Service. I drove straight home, sat down at my computer, and filed the request that same evening. It took me less than an hour. I listed the company name, the employer identification number from the business registration, Karen's name, and I clicked Submit. Then primera. Waited. 3 weeks passed. Then 4. I checked my mailbox every single day. Nothing. And then, on a Wednesday afternoon in late April of 2023, I came home from work to find an envelope in my mailbox. Plain white, no return address on the front. But in the top left corner, printed in small, clean letters, were 3 words that made my heart stop. Internal Revenue Service. I stood there in my driveway, holding that envelope, for a full minute before I opened it. And when I read what was inside, I knew, for the very first time, that Karen Mitchell was going to lose everything. Stay with me, because what was inside that envelope is something Karen absolutely did not want anyone to see. And trust me, if you think what she has been doing is bad, what comes next is 10 times worse. The letter was only 2 pages long. 2 pages, but inside those 2 pages was a single sentence that destroyed everything Karen Mitchell had spent 5 years building. And when I read that sentence, standing in my driveway, in broad daylight, with neighbors walking their dogs just feet away, my hands started to shake. Not from fear, from anger. I opened the envelope standing right there in the driveway. I didn't go inside first. I didn't sit down. I just tore it open with my fingers and pulled out the pages. The afternoon sun was warm on my face. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower was humming. A child was laughing somewhere, far off. At the end of the world was continuing on, completely normal, completely unaware of what I was about to read. The letter was unofficial, IRS, letterhead, clean, formal. At the top, in bold printed read, Internal Revenue Service, Freedom of Information Act Response, Primera Rea de et 11. Then I read it again, and then a third time, slowly, word by word, because I wanted to make absolutely sure I understood what I was looking at. Here is what it said. The IRS had received 3 separate suspicious activity reports related to Sunrise Preventive Services, LLC, over the course of the previous 2 years. 3 reports, filed by 3 different parties. The IRS had reviewed all 3 reports and had flagged the account for further review. Terebio was. And this was the part that hit hardest. still ongoing as of the date of the letter. Someone had already reported Karen. Not one person. Three separate people in Maple Ridge Estates had seen something wrong and had gone to the authorities, and the IRS had been looking at Karen Mitchell for almost 2 years before I ever found that business registration at the county clerk's office. Went inside. I sat down at my kitchen table and read the letter one final time. Then I opened my laptop and started thinking clearly for the first time since this whole thing had started. If the IRS was already investigating, I didn't need to build a case from scratch. What I needed was to make sure that every document I had collected, every statement, every filing, every piece of evidence got into the right hands as fast as possible. But I also needed to understand something first. If 3 people had already reported Karen, and the IRS had been investigating for 2 years, why was she still president of the agency? Why was she still walking the sidewalks every morning with that smile? Why was Sunrise Preventive Services still appearing on the monthly statements like nothing had changed? The answer, when I found it, was both simple and deeply infuriating. Karen had made herself untouchable, at least from the inside. 2 years ago, around the same time, the first suspicious activity reports were filed. Karen had pushed through a change to the HOA bylaws. A small change. A quiet change. The kind of thing that gets approved at a board meeting without anyone really reading it closely. The amendment gave the board president sole authority over all financial decisions and removed the requirement for a second signature on any payment over $5,000. Before the amendment, 2 board members had to sign off on every large payment. After it, only Karen. She had removed the one safeguard that could have stopped her, and she had done it while the IRS was already looking at her. I sat back and let that sink in. Karen Mitchell was not just a thief. She was a planner. She saw things coming before anyone else did, and she moved to protect herself long before others even knew there was a threat. The suspicious activity reports had tipped her off to the possibility that someone was watching, so she had quietly, methodically eliminated any internal check that could expose her. It was cold. It was calculated. And it was, in every way that mattered, brilliant. But brilliant people make mistakes too, and Karen had made one. She had not accounted for the roof. The roofing issue had come up in October of 2022. Several homeowners on the east side of Maple Ridge had reported leaks, water coming through ceilings after heavy rain, damaged drywall, water-stained carpets in bedrooms and living rooms. It was a real problem, and it affected about 30 homes. Karen handled it the way she handled everything. Publicly, efficiently. With that signature smile, she announced at the October quarterly meeting that she had already contacted a contractor, a company called Clearview Roofing Solutions, and that repairs would begin within 2 weeks. She showed slides, professional-looking slides with photos of the damage and detailed cost estimates. The estimate for the full repair was $3,500 per home. 30 homes. That came to $105,000 total. The assessment was divided equally across all 240 homeowners. Each household paid $437.50. Every single person paid without question. Karen had shown the photos. She had presented the numbers. She had stood at that podium in her red blazer and told everyone it was handled. But here is what I found when I started looking into Clearview Roofing Solutions. It didn't exist. No business registration. No license. No website. No reviews. Nothing at all. I called the State Contractor Licensing Board. I checked the Better Business Bureau. I searched every public database I could access. Clearview Roofing Solutions was, like Sunrise Preventive Services before it, a company that existed only on paper. A second shell company under a different name, but feeding money to the same place. I went back to the county clerk's office that same afternoon and filed another records request. This time I was looking for ownership information on Clearview Roofing Solutions. LLC Gerald, the same clerk who had pointed me toward the IRS, processed it on the spot and handed me the filing. He watched my face as I read it. I didn't need to read past the first page. The registered agent was different this time. Not Karen's name, a man named Roger Halley. I didn't recognize the name. But the address? The same PO box. The exact same one used by Sunrise Preventive Services. Raja Haler was connected to Karen. A partner? A friend? Someone who was helping her run the operation from the other side. I had just found a second player in the game. I drove home in silence. No radio. No calls. Just the sound of the engine and my own thoughts. Karen Mitchell had not just been stealing from us. She had been building a system, expanding Italiano, creating layer after layer of fake companies, fake invoices, and fake contractors, all designed to funnel money out of Maple Ridge Estates and into her own pockets. She had done it so smoothly that 240 households had handed her the keys to their finances without ever looking back. But the roof assessment was different, because every single person in that neighborhood had paid for it directly, and the total amount Karen had stolen from that assessment alone, $105,000, was more than enough to trigger exactly the kind of attention she had been trying to avoid. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had researched that morning. The IRS whistleblower office. My hands were steady this time. My voice was calm. When the woman on the other end answered, I said exactly what I had been building toward for months. I have evidence. A lot of Italiano. And I think you're going to want to hear what I have to say. There was a pause on the line. A long one. And then the woman said something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand straight up. Mr. Chen, we already have your name in our system. Someone else called about you. Someone from your own neighborhood. They said you were getting too close. Too close? To what? I thought, and then, very slowly, I already knew the answer. Karen knew. Karen knew exactly what I was doing. And she had gotten to the IRS before I did. Everything comes to a head. Karen Mitchell is cornered. The FBI gets involved, and someone in Maple Ridge Estates is about to pay a price they never imagined. Comment right now if you have been watching from the start. This story ends in a way that will leave you completely speechless. They came on a Thursday morning. 2 black SUVs. No sirens. No flashing lights. They parked right in front of Karen Mitchell's house on Elm Court, and 4 men in suits stepped out. And when Karen opened her front door, still in her bathrobe, coffee in, and the smile on her face disappeared for the first time in 6 years. Everything she had built was about to come crashing down. I had spent the night before preparing, not sleeping. Preparing. I sat at my kitchen table and organized every single document into a thick folder that represented months of work. Bank statements, business filings, HOA invoices, the IRS letter, photos of the damage reports Karen had used to justify the roof assessment, copies of every email I had sent, and every non-answer I had received. I made 2 copies of everything, one for the IRS, one for the FBI. Because by that point, this was no longer just an IRS matter. 3 days after my call to the whistleblower office, I had gotten another phone call. This one came from a woman who introduced herself simply as Special Agent Reeves. She told me she was with the FBI. She asked me to repeat everything I had told the IRS. And then she asked me one question that told me exactly how serious this had become. Mr. Chen, do you have proof that Karen Mitchell knew Roger Halle? I told her about the PO box, the shared address, the matching registration dates, the way both shell companies routed payments through the same financial channels. Agent Reeves listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a brief silence. And then she said, "We've been building a case on Roger Halle for 14 months. 14 months. The FBI had been investigating Roger Halle, Karen's partner, the man whose name appeared on the Clearview roofing filing for over a year, and Karen's connection to him was the link they had been looking for. I was that link. The next morning, Agent Reeves called me back. She told me a joint operation between the IRS Criminal Investigation Division and the FBI was moving forward. Warrants were being drafted. She asked me not to contact anyone at Maple Ridge Estates, not to tell Linda, not to mention it to a single person. If Karen suspects we are coming, she said, documents could disappear. Documents, financial records. the kind of records Karen had been controlling for years. I kept my mouth shut. I went to work the next day like nothing had changed. That evening, I walked Max and waved at Karen when I saw her in her driveway, loading groceries into her car. She waved back. That same smile, that samewarm practiced expression that said everything was fine. But I knew now what that smile really was. It was armor, and it was about to crack. The Thursday they came, primera wa ise at work. I found out later from Linda, who had watched the whole thing from her living room window. She told me that 2 black SUVs had pulled up to Karen's house at exactly 7:45 in the morning. 4 men stepped out, 3 in dark suits, one wearing an FBI jacket. They didn't knock. One of them held up a piece of paper, a federal warrant. Karen had opened the door seconds earlier, coffee cup in hand. Still in her robe, she had been humming something Linda couldn't remember what. When she saw the agents, she stopped. She looked at the warrant. She looked at the men. And then she looked toward Linda's window. She didn't smile, Linda said. Karen's face went completely blank. Not angry, not scared, just empty, like someone had turned off a light behind her eyes. They took her inside to collect documents first. 2 agents stayed with Karen in the kitchen while the others moved through the house, room by room, collecting laptops, files, folders, and 2 external hard drives. The whole thing took 45 minutes. When they were done, they walked Karen out to one of the She was wearing shoes now. Someone had thought to put them on. Her hands were in front of her, not handcuffed, but she walked with her head down. She didn't look at the neighborhood. She didn't wave. She didn't look at anyone. Karen Mitchell was arrested formally that afternoon at the federal courthouse downtown. The charges were extensive: wire fraud, mail fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy to defraud, and one additional charge that made the local news: embezzlement from a non-profit organization, because that is what an HOA is, legally speaking. A non-profit, and what Karen had been doing for 5 years was stealing from one. The total amount listed in the indictment was $428,600. $428,000. The full number, the amount siphoned out at Maple Ridge Estates through Sunrise Preventive Services, Clearview Roofing Solutions, and 3 other shell companies that investigators uncovered during the search of Karen's home. 3 other companies. I had found 2. The FBI had been tracking 5. Roger Hawley was arrested the same day at his apartment across town. He didn't fight it. He didn't deny anything. According to Agent Reeves, Hawley had started cooperating almost immediately. He provided names, dates, account numbers. He told investigators exactly how Karen had structured the operation, how the shell companies were set up, how payments were routed, how the money was cleaned before ending up in a private account under Karen's name at a bank in another state. A bank in another state. Karen had been hiding money out of the county the entire time. The community meeting happened 10 days after the arrest. Same room where Karen had given all her presentations. Same podium, same chairs, but the board president's chair was empty. I stood at the back and listened as the new interim president, a man named Thomas Webb, explained everything honestly. He told them how much money had been stolen, which companies were fake, that the FBI and IRS were working to recover as much as possible. When he finished, the room was silent for a long time. Then Linda raised her hand. She was sitting in the 3rd row, right where she always sat. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady. "Is there anything we can do to get our money back?" Thomas nodded slowly. "Some of it, yes. The federal asset forfeiture process has already begun. Karen's personal accounts, her property, much of it will be seized and returned to the HOA. Asset forfeiture, Karen's house. The house she had walked past every morning on her way around the neighborhood. It was going to be taken from her. 6 months after the arrest, Karen Mitchell pleaded guilty. She didn't go to trial. The evidence was overwhelming. The FBI had recordings. The IRS had financial records going back years. Roger Hawley had given them everything. She was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. 8 years. 8 years for $428,600 stolen from the people she had smiled at every single day. I went to the sentencing. I sat in the gallery, about 6 rows back. Karen was wearing a gray suit, no blazer that day. Her hair was pulled back, the same way she always wore it, but something about her looked different. Smaller, like the room had gotten bigger and she had shrunk. The judge read the sentence. Karen sat very still, looking straight ahead. And then, just before the bailiff stepped forward, she turned her head slightly, and she looked at me, not angry, not bitter. Something else, something I have thought about many times since. Sitting in my kitchen with Max at my feet, I think it might have been respect. Maple Ridge Estates recovered $280,000 over the following year through asset seizure and Karen's frozen accounts. New board members were elected. New bylaws were written, bylaws requiring 2 signatures on every payment, full transparency on every vendor contract, and regular independent audits. The preventive maintenance charges disappeared from the statements entirely, and on the sidewalk outside my house, the mornings are quieter now. No one waves. But things are better. Drop a comment right now and tell me, did you suspect Karen? Was there a moment in this story when everything clicked for you? Because I want to know. And if you live in an HOA right now and something feels even slightly off, do not wait. Check your statements. Ask the questions. The devil, as my father always said, lives in the details.